All right, what's up, Dragon Brood? In our last video, we talked about making sure you have enough mana to cast your spells. This time, we want to make sure you have the right colors to cast the stuff when you want to, particularly if you're playing multicolor decks, because that can be pretty difficult to figure out. And I want to give a heads up going into this video that none of this stuff is the only way to do it. And in reality, pretty much the next deck you go build will probably have some exception to the rule. This is just a really good starting point for people who may just be trying to figure it out, or maybe you played for a while and it's still kind of confusing. So we're going to break this into three parts. The first is going to be making sure you have the right color of each mana to cast your spells. The second part's going to be more about looking at cards with multicolor pips in them and how you can set that up. And then the third is going to be what we call the exceptions to the rules. And actually, while I'm thinking about it, we'll give you a bonus fourth section that should be kind of short, but also your mix of lands and what types you should be playing along with each other. So hopefully this is a good video for you. You have a lot to take away, and you'll check out the other videos as well. So if you haven't subscribed, do so, because after this, there's going to be a pretty good amount of information to absorb. And I should have said, if you're already subscribed, be sure to hit the like button and hype the video because that helps. And if you really want to support right now, get yourself some merch. It'd be a cool thing to put under the Christmas tree for somebody. We have a variety of stuff. Anyway, let's talk about this. Now, this chart you're looking at might look a little bit confusing, but I highlighted the third column because this is something from Frank Carson, I believe, from a while ago. But he broke it down into if your deck has 20 lands, 25 lands, or 30 lands, these are the number of each color type that you should probably have based on the column to the left, and we're going to talk about that. However, I highlighted the second column because most decks are going to have 24 to 27 land, which means you could use this main column as your cheat sheet. Now, I'm going to go ahead and shrink this down a little bit so it's out of the way, and we can bring up some cards and talk about how it correlates to this chart. And just like that, we're ready to go. So let's break this down just a little bit. Now, looking at the chart, we'll bring up something like Basri, right? Basri only costs one colored mana. So if you look at the chart, it says a C there, which is basically for generic color pip, right? So we're going to keep this simple to start. We're just going to look at single color cards, but kind of explain how the chart works. Then we'll get into how we work with multiple mana colors in one cost. But starting here, this is simply saying if you were playing a deck that had more than one color, then if you're trying to cast Basri on turn one, you're going to want at least 14 lands that produce white mana. This increases the odds that you'll have them in the opening hand and that you'll actually be able to cast it on time. Now, there's also the option of making sure you have certain lands untapped on turn one or whatever, but that's a whole different thing. That's a different video. But for now, we're just talking about making sure you have the colors in your hand. So, not too complicated. Now, if we get into Bright Glass or Bright Blade Stoat here, costs a colorless and a white. This now means that you only need 13 lands. Because while you still just need one white mana, you don't necessarily need it on turn one, so you need it on turn two. So this gives you a little bit more wiggle room. And this just means that, let's say of your 25 land, 13 of them should be able to produce white mana if you want to play something with a similar cost on turn two. Now it gets a little more dicey when we start talking about double color pips and no colorless mana. So in this case, it's saying if you wanted to cast something that's double color pip, white, white, then you're going to need 21 of your 25 lands to be something that produces this color. And that makes it a little bit confusing for people because say, well, why do I only need 14 for the one mana on turn one and then I need this many? And it's really just a matter of when you're playing multiple colors, you don't want there to be a white and let's say whatever one of your other colors is, red, right? And be stuck with this in your hand and not be able to play it. Now, if you wanted to play this later in the game and it wasn't important to have it on turn two, that can be a whole different situation. But this is about having the right colors and playing them on time. And this is a good example of how those numbers change, right? Because now we have a Rabo with two colorless and a white pip, which now means you only need 12 to be able to play the Arabo. And that's because you don't need the white mana untapped until turn three. So theoretically, let's play for some reason we were playing a green white something deck and we had a Rabo in there just to make tokens, right? If we don't need a Rabo on one or two because we can't cast it, then those other lands could be green, colorless, whatever, just as long as you have that white mana on turn three. And I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here on casting costs because things can get a little bit different here where we talk about Felidar Retreat, where it's three colorless and a white, and similar costs if you're looking at the chart where it says 3 and a color. Well, you only need 10 lands of that color to be able to cast this on turn 4. And somebody might look in that and go like, "Oh, that seems like so little." But realistically, you don't need them on those other early turns. You just need it on turn 4 plus. So you just need to have 10 of that particular color. And that sounds kind of obvious after you start thinking about it, but sometimes you need that. And actually, this let's talk about something else in deck building here. When you have a card that has 4 colored pips in the cost, you basically need all of your lands to be able to produce this if you want to play it on turn 4. According to the chart, it's 24 of your 25 lands need to produce this. And if you look back a couple of seasons ago, we did play versions of decks with Phyrexian Obliterator and green spells that fought stuff. But basically, all the lands except for maybe 1 or 2 were actually black producing lands. So this kind of checks out with how those decks were built. Because if you wanted to play your Obliterator on turn 4, turn 5, you had to have a bunch of black mana sources. So no surprise here, actually. This tracks. Now, all that aside, let's get a little more specific looking at multiple color pips in one cost. And again, I want to come back to what I pointed out in the beginning of the video of none of this is the only way to do this. None of this is the perfect way to do this. Because what I'm about to talk about is some ways that I use it and what works for me. And I'm just some old head nerd that's been playing Magic forever since the beginning of time. So I've gone through a bunch of different ways to do this. And other people might have other things that work for them. However, this is an interesting thing where we have something like Vraska joins up here. And if we wanted to play this on turn 2, you end up in a pretty tough situation because you are going to need both black and green early. Now, if you had something that just wanted to play black, then again, you would need just 14 of those sources. But you also want something that has green on turn 2. Actually, I guess it'd be 13. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong column or wrong row there in the column. But either way, you want 13 black and 13 green. And that's mostly because you need 1 on turn 1 and 1 on turn 2. And you're still not guaranteed to hit it there, but it's going to be the best case situation. Now, this does get a little complicated because some of your lands will be multi-lands, but that's kind of just the best you can do under the circumstances when you're trying to play multicolor stuff. It gets even more complicated with 3 colors, where we're talking about cards like Katara the Fearless, but I want to save that and put it in our exceptions video, or a segment of the video, because there's some other stuff we want to talk about how we mitigate some of those costs. But I do want to bring up Beifong's Bounty Hunters. Now, when looking at the chart, you're going to see something that's 2 and 2 colors. You're going to need 16 lands of that color. However, we're talking about 2 different colors here. And what I've done when I wasn't sure about how to do all of this is kind of look at this as saying 3 and a green and 3 and a black, right? And then saying, okay, if I was trying to cast something with 3 and a green, what would I need? Well, I would need 10 land that produce green. And if I was trying to produce something that had 3 and a black, I would also need 10 black lands. So I would like to have a situation where I have 10 lands that could at least separately produce green or black if necessary. Now, it's not going to be a perfect mix. Sometimes I'll say, all right, as long as I can get to maybe 8 separate lands that can do that. So I have 16 total that can make me green or black. I'll probably be happy with that, right? It's not an exact science. This is something just to help you out a bit whenever you are playing multicolor pips. It's like I said, there's going to be exceptions for a lot of reasons, and when you see our exceptions section of the video, this is going to make sense. Matter of fact, let's go ahead and hop into that and talk about some of those exceptions right now. Now, I'm going to bring up Katara again, since I mentioned her in the previous segment, but this is a case where you can almost mitigate your whole color setup if you have enough multicolor lands that can solve your problems. So, in the case of looking at something like allies here, we have so many multi-lands. We have Starting Town, Secluded Courtyard, Caves of Koilos, and Jasmine Dragon Tea Shop. So that's 16 lands you can play that can produce whatever color you need. And then we still have options for multicolor passage, multiversal passage, or, you know, if you want to play 2, you want to play 4, whatever. Looking at this setup, you basically have mostly white, which is going to be the predominant color in the deck, and then green as your secondary color, and then a little bit of blue, and then we have 1 red card. So we're not even worried about the 2 red mana because we don't need it until turn 4. And again, we have well more than 10 things that will be able to make us red on turn 4. So if we don't hit that, it's going to be very sad, especially considering the deck also has a creature that can produce any color. So that makes it even easier. And for our 5-color lands, if you want to call them that, then we do still have 2 plains, a forest, and 2 breeding pools to make up the difference in some of the other, like, gotta have extra white, gotta have extra green. But realistically, if we wanted to go hard on just playing all multicolor lands, we could almost get away with it. Granted, because of the nature of standard, sometimes you want some regular basics, you can go fetch for them in case they use like Demolition Field or something like that, and that's mostly what those are there for. But as far as having the right colors at the right time, this deck can do it pretty easily. But let's talk about 2 other decks that are even further out on the exception ladder. Now, this is a good example of why I say there's going to be exceptions to everything, right? Looking at this, we do have some stuff that's double blue at 6 mana. We have technically double blue at 3 mana if we want to be able to cast 3 steps ahead. We also have red mana in here for Ill-Time Explosion and some removal spells. And then, of course, Dragonback Assault, what the deck is based around, that you need all 3 colors for. But there's a couple of things in play that make this a little weird, right? The first is that we don't really need 3 steps ahead on turn 3, right? And we don't need double blue until way later. But realistically, all of our mana needs to be focused on just getting green mana, because that's what fuels this deck. Between Llanowar Elf, Badger Mole Cub getting us extra mana, Earthbender Ascension, which can go search some of our lands to solve our other color issues, as does Encroaching Dragonstorm, also solves our color issues. So realistically, our mana in this deck needs to be focused on mostly green, because we want that on 1 and 2, secondarily red, and then blue is kind of an afterthought as long as we have enough lands that can just make blue or enough islands to go search out with these other things. And if you notice, that's kind of what the mana base is here. We have Fable Passage, which can go fetch for any of our basic lands. We have a bunch of forest, and our multi-lands are mixed with green in both of them, right? So we have Stomping Ground, and then we have Breeding Pool. So we can go get green almost always. That technically gives us 4. Another 5 is 9. Another 5 is 14, 15, 16. So we have 16 sources to get a green land on turn 2. So we can at least have Badger Mole Cub doing things. Obviously, that's enough to Llanowar Elf turn 1. You have to be careful. You can't really count Ba Sing Se in that or the Fable Passages because they have to be tapped on turn 1. But realistically, it gives us those opportunities. Same thing with Earthbending Ascension to be able to go search for something. And this is where we say, all right, we're not really ignoring the other colors, but green is the priority because it fuels everything else in this particular build. Now, in your other case, it might be blue that fuels it because you're drawing a bunch of cards to find your other things or whatever. So the way your deck is built also affects what mana you want to play. And in this deck, we also had to play an extra amount of basics because we still want to be able to fuel our Dragonback Assault, right? Whether that's getting lands with the Ascension, with the Dragonstorm, or even just Fable Passage, you need to have that ability or else your deck's not going to do a whole lot. So in some cases, playing 3 colors, you would want a lot of multicolor lands. In this particular case, we wanted a lot of basics. So that's a little tough. And now I have another example that takes this even one step further. Yeah, so this gets even crazier when we're looking at our mana, right? Because someone might look at this list and say, all right, you're playing black, green, red. You have some green in this one and red. You have double red here, but 1 red in the activation if you want to discard it. And then you have double green, triple green, and green, red, white. Well, ultimately, we don't even care about those colors in this deck, right? The whole plan for this deck is get red and green early. Red and black, excuse me, early so that we can get stuff in hand, discard, fill up our graveyard, and then hopefully have either double black on turn 3 with an artifact, or 4 mana with black so we can zombify one of these things we put in the graveyard, right? So when it comes to our mana, if you notice here, everything is mostly red or white, right? We have a couple of things that have a little bit of green just in case the game goes long, but they also produce red. So every single land is focused on red and black and almost ignoring the green or white part of the deck. Now, we do have Multiversal Passage that we could use. We do have Starting Town that we can use. So it's not like we don't have access to those colors. But in either case, we won't need those colors until at least turn 5, probably even turn 6 or 7, if the games go that long where we feel we need to just hard cast one of these creatures. So we don't need to even worry about it really in the grand scheme of things. Also, consider the fact that this draws extra cards and this draws extra cards. So our odds of getting to one of those other colors that we might need is actually significantly increased. But it's very possible somebody looks at this deck and goes, this mana base is stupid. And it's like, well, no, the goal isn't even to have those early ever. That's not how this deck is trying to win. So it doesn't care about having that. The whole focus is make sure we can hit those key cards on turn 2, turn 3, turn 4. Then worry about everything else. But that aside, that was a fun kind of experiment to show you some things. But I did tell you we were going to talk about land mixers real quick. So let's hop back to that previous list of cards I had. Yeah, for those of you with astute eyes, you were probably wondering why all this was here. Well, it's for this explanation. Because one of the problems you have right now is you can't just play every single land that produces every color that you need. For example, if you were playing something like Blooming Marshes, well, those aren't necessarily going to play well with Wastewood Verge. Or even the fact that you might have a deck that has a bunch of Multiversal Passage or Starting Towns. Kind of like we were saying with the Allies deck, right? Some of these other verges and things wouldn't really do anything in there because we have so many lands that aren't going to be basic lands. Now, if you are playing a list that plays Multiversal Passages, well, these become those basics, and that'll actually trigger your verges. Or if you're playing the Surveil lands that count as basics, say Plains and an Island, for instance, well, then you can get away with playing more of the verges. But then your other problem is not just having the right color, but having the right color at the right time. So if you are going to play things like Blooming Marshes and Starting Towns, you might have to be a little careful with stuff like Restless Ridgeline, especially if your goal is to play certain key cards on turns 4, 5, and 6, because these lands will all come into play tapped at that point. So you have to make that consideration into your mana base as well to make sure you, one, don't have lands that are clashing, but two, also have lands that are untapped when you need them. And I know that's probably a lot to take in, but let's kind of talk about everything we just discussed. Okay, so here's the thing. Like, mana bases can be difficult, and there's a lot to figure out. Magic's got an ever-moving target when you're deck building, so keep that in mind. But the most important thing is make sure that you have the right number of each color pip on your lands to increase the odds that you actually have the mana when you need it. That's the baseline key thing. And then from there, look at, all right, do I have enough multi-lands to satisfy what I need without tripping the deck up with the number of tap lands? For instance, if too many of your lands were tapped on turn 1, you wouldn't be able to make a turn 1 play. So if you're playing something highly aggressive with a bunch of 1 mana and 2 mana things, that could also be a problem. And then also just consider what your deck's trying to do. While you can play all of those colors in multi-lands or whatever, like, is it necessary? That's another thing to consider. Like we were talking about with the Dino Reanimator deck, like, could we play some green-black lands or whatnot? Yeah, sure, we could. But realistically, those are probably going to be worse than just selling out on everything that's red and black to make sure we can do exactly what the deck wants to do. So, yeah, there's a lot there, but y'all let me know if you like this type of video, if this helped any of you out. Honestly, again, don't forget, please do me a favor, hit the like button and the subscribe button. That would help so very much. And check out the merch if you will. And if you did like these types of deck tips and whatnot, be sure to check out the next video so you can get some more. And we have a playlist on the channel that's full of different types of Magic strategies, so if you want to get caught up or just learn some more things to help your game, go have a look. But that's all I have you for now. We'll see you next time.